Welcome back. Tonight, we explore the hidden lore, buried secrets, and untold stories woven into the world of Call of Duty Zombies. From the crumbling corridors of Nacht der Untoten, all the way through the fractured multiverse of the Dark Ether. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The cycle that was never supposed to exist, the entire Zombies storyline, every map, every crew, every screaming Easter egg cutscene, is the result of a paradox that was never meant to happen. At the core of the Ether Saga, the 4 members of Primus are sent back in time to fight in the Great War because they drank the blood of the Alcatraz mobsters, making them resistant to being erased from existence. But those blood vials only exist because Primus went back to Alcatraz to collect them, and they only knew to go there because of the Chronorium, a book that could only tell them the future because those events already happened. Every version of Primus that ever existed was only possible because a previous version of Primus already existed before them. The cycle has no beginning. It was always already in motion. Dr. Monty, the godlike keeper who runs the house in Agartha, deliberately maintains this loop because the cycle is the very thing keeping him alive. The moment the cycle breaks, everything he's built collapses. He spends the entire story pretending to help the heroes while secretly engineering the conditions that keep them running in circles, making him arguably the most dangerous villain in the entire saga, hiding behind a warm British accent and a cozy fireplace. The Apothicons seeded Earth on purpose, long before Group 935 ever set foot in Der Riese, long before Dr. Maxis ever noticed a strange meteorite near Breslau. The Apothicons had already been at work for centuries. These ancient corrupted keepers, once beings of light who fell into the dark ether and transformed into enormous eldritch horrors, deliberately sent element 115 meteorites crashing into the Earth across multiple dimensions. Their goal was patient and precise. They wanted the element to be discovered, studied, and weaponized. They needed humanity to tear open rifts between dimensions, because the Apothicons themselves couldn't break back into creation without those rifts being opened from the inside. Every zombie outbreak, every Group 935 experiment, every time someone built a teleporter and accidentally sent themselves through the ether, that was the plan. Humanity was never stumbling into forbidden science. Humanity was being guided there step by careful step, by ancient creatures waiting in the dark for someone to open the door. The Illuminati controlled Richthofen from the start. Before Edward Richthofen ever walked into Dr. Maxis's laboratory, before he ever heard the word Group 935, he had already been recruited by the Illuminati. He was a member of that secret society since August 30th, 1925. Years before he joined Group 935, when Maxis approached him and offered him a position at Der Riese. Richthofen accepted on the Illuminati's behalf, not out of genuine scientific partnership. His entire career working alongside Maxis was an extended intelligence operation. His obsession with the Moon Pyramid device, his years of secret experiments with teleportation, his eventual betrayal of Maxis, all of it traces back to an agenda that predated their relationship. Maxis thought he was recruiting a brilliant, if unstable, scientist. He was actually inviting a spy into his home. This is one of the reasons why Richthofen already knew about the MPD on the Moon before anyone else at Group 935 had a clue it even existed, because his handlers had told him where to look. Element 115 is the fabric of the multiverse. According to Maxis himself, element 115 isn't just a strange radioactive ore from a meteorite. It is the literal fabric of space-time, the structural material holding the multiverse together. Every dimension, every timeline, every version of reality that exists within the Ether Saga is threaded together by the presence of 115. This is why Richthofen's early experiments with teleportation worked at all. You don't move through space with element 115. You move through the seams of reality itself. This is also why using it in excessive amounts causes such catastrophic side effects. Overloading the fabric of space-time causes it to fray, distort, and eventually tear open. The zombie outbreak isn't really a biological event. It's a dimensional event. The dead rise because element 115 dissolves the boundary between life and death, just as surely as it dissolves the boundary between one universe and the next. When Maxis warns in the original Der Riese recordings that misusing the element could cause a collapse of the space-time continuum, he wasn't being dramatic. He was describing something he already partially understood. The Tunguska event was element 115. On June 30th, 1908, a massive explosion flattened more than 830 square miles of remote Siberian forest near the Tunguska River. In the real world, scientists still debate exactly what caused it. A meteor airburst, a comet, something else entirely. In the zombies universe, the answer is unambiguous. That explosion was an element 115 meteorite impact. It was the same impact that eventually gave Group 935 access to the deposits along the Tunguska River. The same deposits that allowed them to establish a facility in Siberia, which would eventually become the setting for the map Call of the Dead. The Apothicons didn't just randomly seed meteors across the earth. They aimed them. Tunguska was deliberate. The remote Siberian wilderness was chosen specifically because a large-scale impact there would go relatively undetected long enough for the element to remain intact and undisturbed until the right people found it. By the time the 20th century's great powers went looking for the strange material, it had been waiting in the frozen ground for years. Group 935 was founded on meteor fragments. Group 935 was formally established on May 10, 1931, when Dr. Ludwig Maxis was dispatched to investigate a meteorite impact near Breslau, Germany. He found the crater, found the fragments, and immediately understood that he was looking at something that defied conventional chemistry. He named the organization after the address where his first lab was established and set about quietly building an international network of scientists willing to work outside the normal constraints of institutional research. The group's official mission statement was almost laughably idealistic. They existed to improve the human condition. In practice, they existed to study and weaponize element 115, using funding they would eventually secure from the Nazi Party. The Reichstag came on board not because they understood what 115 really was, but because they were promised super soldiers and wonder weapons, tools to win the coming war. Maxis got his funding, the Nazis got a research group, and 115 got the audience it had been waiting for. The first zombie was a test subject Richthofen murdered. Among the most quietly chilling facts in the early lore is this. The very first zombie in the Group 935 timeline was a human being that the scientists reanimated after death. Not an accidental exposure, not a field outbreak. A deliberate, documented experiment. Maxis and Richthofen first successfully resurrected a teleported corpse that had already died during an earlier failed experiment. Initially it obeyed. It responded to stimuli. For a brief, extraordinary moment, they had done it. They had bridged the gap between life and death with science. Then it went rabid. It attacked them. The test subject was euthanized. This is documented in radio logs scattered across the maps, told in Maxis's dry clinical voice, as though describing a failed chemistry experiment, rather than the moment humanity's doom became inevitable. What they created wasn't a soldier. What they created was a blueprint. Fluffy was the first hellhound. Every player who has survived a dog round in Call of Duty Zombies has faced the hellhounds, those fiery, spectral canines that erupt from crackling portals of electricity and charge the players with an almost personal hostility. Very few players know the origin of those creatures. The first hellhound was Fluffy, Samantha Maxis's pet dog. During a teleportation experiment at Dereza, Dr. Maxis attempted to use Fluffy as a living test subject to prove the technology could work on biological organisms. It didn't work the way he hoped. Fluffy was teleported, but something went catastrophically wrong during the process. The dog returned to the teleporter transformed, a raging, burning, undead animal. When Samantha ran into the room asking what had happened to her dog, Richtofen saw his opportunity. He locked both Maxis and Samantha inside the room with the hellhound, activated the teleporter, and set his betrayal in motion. He genuinely believed he was killing them both that night. He was wrong, and that mistake would cost him everything. Richtofen's soul was already whispered to. Long before Richtofen ever touched the Moon Pyramid device, long before his famous soul swap with Samantha, he had already been psychically influenced by the MPD. On a secret trip to the Moon facility, Griffin Station, a facility he had built under the noses of everyone at Group 935, Richtofen came into contact with the Ether Pyramid before it was fully powered. The device reached out to him. Whatever whispered through the machine in that moment permanently altered him, amplifying already dangerous impulses into something more clinical and absolute. It is not entirely accurate to say that Richtofen was simply a sadistic madman who decided to betray everyone out of ambition. His obsession with the ether was in part the result of a direct psychic corruption event, years before his grand scheme reached its conclusion. When Maxis notices that Richtofen is growing unstable and erratic, he isn't just watching a colleague burn out. He is watching the slow-motion aftermath of a man whose mind was touched by something he was never meant to touch. Samantha's room exists across all timelines. In Kino der Toten, one of the most beloved Black Ops maps, there is a small hidden room in the projector area, Samantha's room. It contains a teddy bear, a monkey bomb toy, and a crude homemade diorama of Der Riese. Samantha built this model while she was controlling the zombies from within the ether, recreating the facility where her father's betrayal happened. This detail is heartbreaking on its own, but what makes it truly strange is that Samantha's room appears across multiple maps, in fractured and altered forms. In later entries, the room reappears in destroyed states, covered in blood. Teddy bears everywhere. In the Ether mythology, the house in Agartha, where Samantha later lives with Dr. Monty, is connected to this room. The room seems to exist at the intersection of dimensions, a physical imprint of a child's grief, bleeding through the walls of multiple realities simultaneously, anchored to its origin point by something no scientific theory can fully explain. Samantha was 7 years old when this all started. According to lore logs and messages decoded from the Black Ops data servers, Samantha Maxis was approximately 6 to 7 years old at the time her father gave her Fluffy as a pet. The registry confirms Fluffy was given to her on January 11th, 1942. The same log confirms her blood type on file at Dereza was recorded as AB negative. Her father was running experiments on the nature of death while raising a small child in a secret Nazi research facility. She had a room there. She had toys there. She watched her dog transform into a monster. She was locked in a room with it by someone she had no reason to fear. And when she ended up at Griffin Station in a panic, she was still a child when she touched the Moon Pyramid device and found herself in possession of an incomprehensible amount of supernatural power. The entire first chapter of the zombie story is, underneath all its science fiction, the story of what happens when adults make catastrophic decisions in the presence of a child who absorbs every consequence. The teddy bears are Dr. Monty's fingerprints. Teddy bears appear in almost every single zombies map throughout the Ether saga. They're in mystery boxes. They appear on walls as chalk drawings. They show up in hidden rooms and in specific locations that trigger Easter egg music. For years, players treated them as fun, creepy atmosphere. The lore explanation arrives slowly across multiple games. Dr. Monty, the ancient keeper who lives in Agartha and presents himself as a kindly, paternal figure, is the one placing them. The gobblegum machines, the Coca-Cola machines, the mystery box itself. Monty confirms in his own dialogue that he influenced the creation of these things, nudging Group 935 scientists from behind the scenes. The teddy bears are his signature, a reminder visible across every timeline and every dimension that he is always watching. What makes this chilling rather than simply interesting is that Monty is eventually revealed to be the final antagonist of the Ether story, the one trying to keep the heroes trapped in a cycle for his own survival. His fingerprints were on everything, including the toys. The mystery box has a master. The mystery box, that glowing, floating relic of randomness that every Zombies player has cursed and adored in equal measure, is not a random phenomenon. Monty directly influenced its creation. In his own words, recorded in the Revelations map, he describes tinkering with the systems of reality in ways that nudge scientists toward creating specific tools, including the mystery box and the Coca-Cola machines. He describes it with almost fond amusement, like an architect reviewing blueprints for a house someone else thinks they designed. The implication is significant. Every time a player opens a mystery box and receives a weapon, that interaction is, in some abstract sense, Monty curating the player's experience of his constructed universe. The floating teddy bear that appears when the box moves location is not just a fun quirk. It is Monty's symbol, moving with his inventory. The box doesn't just belong to the universe, it belongs to him. Richtofen was known as the Butcher. Before Edward Richtofen was a zombie-controlling, ether-obsessed scientist, he was an interrogator for the Axis powers. His reputation in that role was so extreme that his victims and colleagues gave him a name, the Butcher. This is not idle rumor within the lore. Richtofen's documented behavioral history before Group 935 includes deeply disturbing patterns of cruelty that began in childhood. He tortured animals. He tormented his younger sister. As an adult, he found professional legitimacy for his instincts by becoming an interrogator where the screams of his subjects were not a violation, but a job requirement. Maxis's recruitment of Richtofen was, by every available account, the worst professional decision he ever made. Richtofen wasn't unstable because the ether touched him. The ether found something that was already there and gave it direction. The distinction matters because it means Richtofen's arc of eventual redemption in the Primus timeline, where he sacrifices himself to save the universe, represents not a return to something pure, but the construction of something good in a person who had to choose it from scratch. Dr. Maxis was never supposed to have a daughter. The law hints at something deeply strange about Samantha's origin. Maxis's wife, Samantha's mother, died at an unspecified point before the main events of the zombie storyline. Her death is confirmed in a radio log found on the moon map. Maxis never discusses her. There are no records of her. In the Dimension 63 alternate timeline, the version of Maxis who becomes part of Primus is a man who has never had a daughter at all. He is simply a scientist. When Samantha's voice reaches him through the interdimensional noise around the Origins excavation site, he becomes completely obsessed with her, convinced she is the key to understanding element 115, long before he understands who she actually is to him. His love for her, in both timelines, defines his every action. In the main timeline, he makes every mistake trying to protect her. In Dimension 63, he makes every sacrifice trying to free her. Someone he only knows as a voice, not even as a memory. The Wunderwaffe, DG2, was Richthofen's creation. The Wunderwaffe, DG2, the iconic electrical wonder weapon introduced in Shi no Numa, was Richthofen's invention, not Maxis's. Richthofen designed it using element 115 as its primary power source. Maxis wanted him to mass produce it so that Germany could use it as a decisive weapon to win World War II. Richthofen refused, or at the very least, deliberately delayed and sabotaged the mass production process. His reason, as far as the law tells us, was partly that he considered the weapon too valuable to distribute widely, and partly that he resented being told what to do with his own creation. He and Maxis fought about this repeatedly. It was one of the primary catalysts of their professional and personal breakdown. Richthofen's refusal to give Maxis what he'd promised to, Germany, was a betrayal of the agreement that had funded all of Group 935's operations, which gave Richthofen leverage and gave Maxis a reason to consider removing him. Neither of them moved fast enough. The Hellhound experiment happened first. The Pack-a-Punch was invented in the Old West, according to a jingle hidden in Derise's audio files and confirmed through additional law scraps. The original concept for the Pack-a-Punch machine was not invented by Group 935. It was conceived by a blacksmith in the American West, a man named Jeb Brown. How a 19th century American blacksmith came up with a design that Group 935 would later perfect using element 115 is never fully explained. The implication within the broader law framework suggests that the ether bleeds, influences across time and dimension in ways that make it almost impossible to fully trace causality. Monty's influence reaches backward in time as well as across dimensions. Whether Jeb Brown was a genuine historical figure who stumbled onto the right concept, or whether Monty nudged him toward it, is one of those questions the law delights in leaving open. What is confirmed is that every Pack-a-Punch machine in every map, across every timeline, traces its theoretical lineage to someone who never heard of element 115. Group 935's official motto, "Conceal the truth." Every member of Group 935 received a field operations manual upon joining the organization. The manual opened with a welcome address from Dr. Maxis that included the group's official motto, "The future is in our hands." It described a mission to improve the human condition through advanced science, to create technologies that would benefit all of mankind. It said nothing about the Nazi Party. It said nothing about wonder weapons or zombie armies or element 115. It was recruiting literature for an organization that had already made a pact with the Third Reich, promising experimental weapons in exchange for continued funding. The scientists who joined believing in the idealistic pitch, and some of them genuinely did believe in it, at least early on, found themselves progressively deeper in research that had nothing to do with improving the human condition and everything to do with determining how effectively human beings could be killed, reanimated, and weaponized. The motto was a lie before the ink dried. Nikolai's Wives and the Vodka. Nikolai Belinsky is one of the most beloved comedic characters in all of Zombies. His obsession with vodka, his gruff delivery, his dark jokes about his many marriages, all of it seems like pure character flavoring designed for laughs. But the lore runs much deeper than the comedy. In the timeline entries, it's recorded that Nikolai's first wife was killed during the German advance into the Soviet Union. His response was to turn to alcohol to numb the pain, and the subsequent marriages, multiple by most accounts, were attempts to fill a grief he never properly processed. Richthofen noticed this and exploited it. When he was experimenting on Nikolai at the Siberian facility, he specifically developed a serum made primarily from vodka to administer to his test subject, because Nikolai had become so dependent on alcohol that it was the only thing he would reliably respond to. Nikolai's relationship with vodka isn't a personality quirk. It's a symptom of profound, never-treated grief that Richthofen deliberately encouraged because a drunk and grieving soldier was an easier test subject to control. Takeo Masaki was a spy sent to destroy Group 935. Takeo Masaki, the stoic, honor-bound Japanese soldier of the original crew, did not end up in Richthofen's Siberian facility by accident. He was sent there intentionally. As a high-ranking and deeply loyal soldier of the Imperial Japanese Army, Tako was dispatched by the Emperor himself after receiving Tako's own report that the research being conducted at the Rising Sun facility in Japan was unacceptable. He had investigated Group 935's Japanese operations and was disturbed by what he found. His mission was infiltration, intelligence gathering, and disruption. Instead, he was captured by Group 935 and handed over to Richthofen for experimentation. When Richthofen wiped his memories, he didn't just take away Takeo's past. He took away the mission. He took away the Emperor. He took away the entire context that gave Takeo's code of honor meaning. Takeo spent years afterward as Richthofen's obedient companion, driven by instincts and values he could no longer properly connect to any history. A man of profound loyalty with nothing left to be loyal to, except the strangers walking beside him. Tank Dempsey was the replacement. In the original Group 935 experimentation records, Richthofen notes that he was running tests on multiple subjects at the Siberian facility, Nikolai, Takeo, and an unknown Mexican subject referred to in clinical notes. When Richthofen accidentally killed this third subject during an experiment, he needed a replacement. That replacement was Tank Dempsey. Dempsey had originally been sent to the Wittenau Asylum facility in Berlin as part of a Marine recon team dispatched to extract Peter McCain, an OSS spy who had been working undercover inside Group 935. When the extraction failed and Dempsey was captured, Richthofen had his new test subject, the man who would become one of the most iconic characters in gaming history, was essentially selected by accident because someone else died first. He was never supposed to be there. His entire journey through the Zombies saga, every zombie slain, every timeline fractured, every sacrifice made, begins with an unlucky Marine walking into the wrong facility at the wrong moment. The zombies in the early maps had no controller, One of the most commonly misunderstood elements of the early Zombies maps is the question of who is directing the undead. In Nacht der Untoten, Verrückt, and Shi no Numa, there is no clear demonic announcer, no Samantha, no Richthofen, no Maxis speaking from the ether. The zombies in these early maps are operating under a different framework. The outbreak began as an uncontrolled cascade, an accident of element, 115 exposure, and the undead were directed by instinct and residual ether energy rather than any single conscious entity. Samantha doesn't take control until after the Der Riese incident, when she enters the Moon Pyramid device and discovers she can direct the Horde. The absence of a controller in the early maps is itself a lore detail, suggesting that the original zombie outbreak was genuinely autonomous, an accident spiraling without guidance, which in some ways makes it even more horrifying. The undead were never being aimed, they were just hungry. Nacht der Untoten was an accident. The very first Zombies map, Nacht der Untoten, Night of the Undead, was not planned as a storytelling experience. Treyarch developer Jimmy Zielinski has described how it originated as a fun internal project that the team hid in Call of Duty. World at War as a secret unlockable mode after completing the campaign. 4 unnamed Marines holding a bunker against endless zombie waves. No plot, no backstory, no names. It was designed to be a chaotic, terrifying bonus experience. When it shipped and the community went absolutely wild over it, Treyarch found themselves with something they had never intended. The seed of a mythology. Everything that came after, the timelines, the multiverse, the characters, was built backward from an afterthought. The very first location in one of gaming's most elaborate continuous narratives was created without the faintest intention of it meaning anything at all. The bunker in Nacht never gets explained. The unnamed building in Nacht der Untoten is, in the in-game fiction, an abandoned Allied airfield that 4 Marines find themselves defending against the dead. The lore never fully explains who these 4 Marines were, how they got separated from their unit, or why the zombie outbreak in this particular location had already begun before Samantha took control. In the broader timeline, the events of Nacht der Untoten take place on June 4th, 1945. After the fall of Germany, after the Der Riese incident, when Samantha would already be inside the Moon Pyramid device. The building itself reappears across multiple later maps, in Transit, in Revelations, and most significantly in Die Machine, the Black Ops Cold War launch map, where the original bunker ruins are present as a physical landmark within a much larger facility. The unnamed Marines at the center of Nacht are never given official identities. They fought and died and vanished, and the universe moved on without them. Verrückt introduced perks and changed everything. The second Zombies map, Verrückt, meaning crazy in German, introduced 2 mechanics that would define the mode forever. Perca-Cola machines and player-operated traps. The map is set in the Wittenau Sanatorium in Berlin, the same asylum facility that Peter McCain was stationed at as a spy, and that Tank Dempsey's recon team was dispatched to investigate. In the fiction, this is one of Group 935's secondary facilities, one of 2 built by Germany in response to Maxis's request for additional funding and resources. The asylum was specifically selected because of what Group 935 intended to do there. Experiment on patients who were already institutionalized, people whose disappearance would attract minimal attention. When you walk through Verrückt's corridors, you are walking through what was once a functioning hospital that Group 935 converted into a weapons testing facility. The patients became subjects, the staff became either collaborators or casualties, and then the outbreak happened and made the entire facility irrelevant. The song in Verrückt is Samantha's grief. Every Zombies map from the original era contains a hidden musical Easter egg. In Verrückt, the hidden song is called Lullaby for a Dead Man, and it is activated by flushing one of the map's toilets 3 times. The lyrics of the song, performed by Eleanor Siegman, the vocalist responsible for most of the iconic early Zombies soundtrack, are written from Samantha's point of view. They describe her feelings about her father's death and the weight of the inheritance he left her. A zombie army, an ether to rule, and a grief so enormous it became a weapon. Samantha is not simply the vengeful god of the early maps. She is a child who watched her father die, was told to kill everyone responsible, and did exactly what she was asked to do with every resource available to her. The lullaby is the version of her grief that she couldn't express any other way, embedded in the walls of the facility where her father's betrayal began to take shape, where the first test subject became monsters. Shai no Numa and the Rising Sun facility, Shai no Numa, Swamp of Death, is set in a Japanese research facility built in a swamp in Japanese-occupied territory. This facility was built by the Imperial Japanese Army after soldiers discovered an element 115 meteorite fragment in the swamp. Division 9, the Japanese equivalent of Group 935, was created to oversee operations here. The facility was eventually handed over to Group 935 as part of a diplomatic agreement between Germany and Japan's war efforts. Division 9 remained involved on site even after the transfer. This cooperative arrangement between Group 935 and Division 9 explains how Takeo, a Japanese soldier, ended up entangled with a German research organization. The Rising Sun facility was the original point of contact between the two programs. The meteorite still present in Shinonuma is the same one that gave Division 9 the initial material for their experiments. When players interact with it during the Easter egg for a hidden song called The One, they are touching the piece of rock that started the eastern branch of the 115 arms race. Peter McKenna hung there for months. In Shinonuma, there is a hanging body on the map, an American man suspended above the players' heads in the starting area. This body belongs to Peter McKain, the OSS spy, who was embedded inside Group 935 and eventually outed as an infiltrator. The in-game timeline notes that after being discovered, Peter was captured and executed at the Shinonuma facility. He was hung and left there as a visible warning to anyone else who might consider betrayal. Tank Dempsey's original mission, the one that got him captured and turned into a test subject, was specifically dispatched to extract Peter before Group 935 could close in on him. Dempsey arrived too late. Peter was already dead, his body serving as a gruesome monument to the organization's paranoia. The hanging man in Shinonuma is easy to miss on first playthrough. Knowing who he is transforms a piece of background atmosphere into a gravestone for the person whose death set the entire Dempsey chain of events into motion. Deriza is where the story was born. Deriza, the giant, is the fourth and final Zombies map from the World at War era, and it remains the single most important location in the entire Ether saga. This is where Group 935's main facility was located, in Lower Silesia, near Breslau, Germany, a city now known as Rockwell in Poland. This is where the teleporters were built. This is where the first Pack-a-Punch machine was installed. This is where Maxis betrayed Richtofen's trust, and Richtofen betrayed Maxis in return, and where Samantha's grief was unleashed on the world. Every map that follows in the Ether timeline is, in some sense, a downstream consequence of what happened at Der Riese. The facility was officially disbanded on November 5th, 1945, and yet it keeps appearing. In Black Ops 3, the Giant is a direct remake of Der Riese with added premise lore. The original facility exists in multiple timelines simultaneously, each version carrying slightly different histories, different radios, different secrets hidden in its walls. Der Riese is not just a map. It is the wound from which everything else bled. The Hellhound round was always personal. When Hellhounds spawn in zombies, the fiery dog round that replaces a regular zombie wave, many players know it as a time challenge, a change of pace, a way to earn a max ammo drop. Very few players know the sound that plays when the Hellhound round ends is Samantha laughing. Not a generic horror laugh. Samantha Maxis, the 7-year-old girl whose dog was turned into the first Hellhound by her father's betrayal and her captor's cruelty, laughing with a child's particular delight. The round ends and you hear her. She is delighted by the Hellhounds. She created more of them. Creatures born from the same event that began her suffering. And she uses them as a form of nostalgia, or possibly revenge, or possibly both. Every Hellhound round in the original maps is, at some subtle level, Samantha playing. The players are her toys, the facility is her dollhouse, and the Hellhounds are her favorite game. The Pack-a-Punch is 5,000 points for a reason. The Pack-a-Punch machine costs exactly 5,000 points, a cost so familiar to long-time players that nobody questions it. Within the fiction, the cost isn't arbitrary. Richthofen once observed that 5,000 points represents approximately the energetic value of the souls absorbed by a weapon after sustained use in the ether-adjacent environment of a zombie outbreak. The machine isn't upgrading your weapon with science. It's using the residual soul energy the weapon has absorbed from killing zombies to permanently enhance it. Every point you earn from fighting the undead is, in the lore, a unit of psychic energy harvested from the ether. The economy of zombies isn't points, it's souls. You are spending the life force of the dead to make your weapons better at killing more dead. In a cycle that feeds into the same ether systems, Richthofen was trying to control all along. Kino der Toten was a propaganda theater. The fan-favorite map, Kino der Toten, Cinema of the Dead, is set in an abandoned theater in Berlin. In the real world of the Ether timeline, this facility was built by Germany as one of 2 additional research locations funded alongside the Wittenau Asylum. The theater was repurposed from an actual working Berlin cinema into a Group 935 experimentation and demonstration space. The Nova 6 crawler experiments conducted here, the gas-releasing zombie variant unique to this map, were designed as demonstrations of chemical and biological crowd control capabilities for Nazi high command. The film projections that flicker across the walls during a match are not simply atmospheric decoration. They are actual Group 935 propaganda reels, created to showcase the effectiveness of their research to their military backers. The posters visible in the lobby, showing shadowy figures, skulls, film credits in German, are marketing materials for a program whose audience was the Third Reich. The cinema was turned into a pitch deck for the zombie army. Kino's teleporter sent the crew through time. At the end of Der Riese's story, Richthofen and the crew overloaded the teleporter using the Wunderwaffe DG-2. The intent was to travel to Griffin Station on the moon. Instead, the massive energy surge sent them approximately 18 years into the future, arriving in the abandoned Kino facility in the early 1960s. Richthofen was apparently unaware this was possible. He seems genuinely disoriented, as documented in his diary entries from this period. The crew found themselves in an abandoned theatre with no explanation for how or why they were there, surrounded by the walking dead, with no immediately clear path forward. This jump cut in the timeline is significant because it means the events of Kino der Toten, 5, and Ascension all happen almost 2 decades after the last events at Der Riese, a gap during which the world continued to exist under zombie-related chaos with no active management from the original crew. Those 18 years are largely unexplored territory in the lore. The Pentagon mission and JFK, the Map 5, released as a Black Ops bonus map available from the start, is set in the Pentagon during what appears to be November 1963. The 4 playable characters are John F. Kennedy, Fidel Castro, Robert McNamara, and Richard Nixon. According to the Zombies timeline, a zombie outbreak occurs at the Pentagon immediately following a meeting between these 4 political figures. The meeting itself is described in lore as a consequence of the events at the Ascension Cosmodrome, where the activities of Richthofen's crew caused a ripple effect through nearby government facilities. The timeline notes that all 4 politicians survived the outbreak, which is an interesting detail given that Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963 in the real world. In the Zombies universe, JFK survived a zombie outbreak at the Pentagon in the same month he died in Dallas. The 5 Easter egg has never had a traditionally completable main quest, but the audio and environmental details of the map contain significant lore about how aware US government was of Group 935's research by this point. Ascension and the Soviet space race. The map Ascension is set at a Soviet space facility, a cosmodrome that the in-game lore places as a direct competitor to and parallel of Group 935's Griffin station operations. The Soviets had their own 115 research program, their own captured Group 935 scientists, and their own attempts to reach the moon before the Americans. The character of Gersh, a scientist trapped inside the Casimir mechanism on the map, is a direct casualty of this program, locked into a dimensional pocket by colleagues who wanted him out of the way. When Richthofen's crew arrived at Ascension and freed Gersh, they were interfering with Soviet operations that had been running entirely independent of anything the original Group 935 had set in motion. The lore implication is significant. Element 115 wasn't just a German or Japanese problem. By the early 1960s, every major world power with access to the right resources had started their own parallel research. The Cold War wasn't just about missiles and ideology. It was quietly a race for control of the ether. Call of the Dead was George Romero's best work. The map, Call of the Dead, set in a frozen Siberian filming location, features a roster of celebrity zombie slayers including Danny Trejo, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michael Rooker, and Robert Englund, while the main antagonist is a massive, electrified, infuriated zombie version of George A. Romero himself. It seems like pure self-aware fan service. It is, in fact, completely canon within the ether story. The filming location is built on or near the Group 935 Siberian facility established along the Tunguska River. The same facility established after the 1908 meteorite impact. The real George Romero in this universe had discovered classified Group 935 documents about zombie experiments during research for his films. He came to Siberia for his movie shoot and was exposed to element 115 still present in the environment, which zombified him. His entire career as the founding father of zombie cinema was, in the zombies lore, directly inspired by Stolen Group 935 research. The genre he created was a long echo of a science program nobody was supposed to know about. Shangri-La was a time loop before the crew arrived. The map Shangri-La is set in a hidden temple somewhere in Asia, and it features two hapless explorers named Brock and Gary, who have been trapped there long before the main crew ever arrives. These two researchers found Shangri-La in the 1950s while searching for Agartha, the hidden dimension at the center of the ether mythology. What they found instead was a time loop. Shangri-La's architecture and the power of its shrinking gun artifacts suggest it sits at a natural intersection between dimensions, a location where the membrane between timelines is thin enough that time itself becomes unstable. Brock and Gary have been reliving the same sequence of events, dying and resetting, for what the lore implies is decades before Richtofen's crew arrives. When the main crew visits, they actually travel back in time within the map to interact with Brock and Gary during earlier points in their loop, making the crew's intervention simultaneously necessary and causally self-referential. Richtofen took the focusing stone from this location, one of the two items he needed to execute his grand scheme on the moon. The moon map destroyed the Earth. The Ether story's first major climax occurs in the moon map, where Richtofen completes his grand scheme by fusing the golden rod and the focusing stone and using them to swap his soul with Samantha Maxis's inside the moon pyramid device. He succeeds. He takes control of the zombie horde. He wins. And then, in a remarkable twist of cosmic karma, Maxis launches 3 rockets from the moon's surface and destroys Earth's atmosphere. Billions of people die. The planet is reduced to a post-apocalyptic ruin. Richtofen, newly in possession of everything he had spent his entire career scheming to acquire, finds himself controlling zombies on a scorched, uninhabitable planet. He got exactly what he wanted, and it meant nothing. The Earth that the Black Ops 2 maps take place on, Green Run, Die Rise, Buried, is this ruined, broken world. The landscape that looks like devastated post-nuclear countryside is not metaphor. The Earth was literally destroyed as a side effect of a power struggle between 2 scientists who couldn't stop fighting each other. The bus in Green Run follows a ghost's path. The Black Ops 2 survival experience transit places players in a post-apocalyptic American countryside. Riding a bus between destroyed towns and landmarks, the bus runs on a fixed route and cannot be redirected. Many players found this frustrating, not understanding why the game was so rigid about where the vehicle would and wouldn't go. The lore explanation lies in the bus driver himself, a robotic driver referred to in files as Jackass, following a pre-programmed route that hasn't been updated since before the apocalypse. He is running an old shuttle service, serving landmarks that no longer meaningfully exist, carrying passengers to destinations that have been destroyed. But within the fiction of transit, the route connects multiple sites that are important to the ether's residual energy in the area. Maxis and Richtofen both have reasons to want the Victis crew moving between these specific locations. The bus route wasn't chosen arbitrarily. It was engineered to position the survivors exactly where either Maxis or Richtofen needed them to be. Mob of the Dead is a pocket dimension, the beloved Black Ops 2 map. Mob of the Dead, set on Alcatraz Island, is not simply a zombie outbreak on a famous prison. It is a dimensional pocket, a customized version of Alcatraz created by the Apothecons and managed by the Warden as a purgatory. The 4 playable mobsters, Finn O'Leary, Albert Arlington, Salvatore De Luca, and Billy Handsome, are already dead when the map begins. They were executed in the real world on the morning of January 19th, 1934. Sal, Billy and Finn had murdered Arlington on the prison rooftop on New Year's Eve, 1933, after he tried and failed to organize a prison break. For their crime, all four were condemned. The warden, acting under the influence of the Shadow Man, created the pocket dimension to torment their souls indefinitely, keeping them in a loop where they repeatedly attempt an escape they can never complete. The electric chairs on the Golden Gate Bridge aren't transport mechanisms. They're the execution site. Every time the players reset, the mobsters are dying again. Brutus was the warden, the terrifying zombie boss of Mob of the Dead. Brutus, an enormous, chain-draped creature in a guard uniform who targets and disables all the players' utilities, is the warden of Alcatraz. In the real-world history of Mob of the Dead's fiction, the warden was an ordinary man who was contacted by the Shadow Man before the events of the map. The Shadow Man convinced him that by creating the pocket dimension, by bringing the mobsters' souls here and trapping them in a loop, he would achieve something meaningful in service of the Apothecan's plans. The warden followed through, orchestrating the conditions for all four mobsters to die, and then killing himself with an electric chair to enter the dimension he had created for them. He became Brutus, the horrifying enforcer of the endless loop. His entire existence in the purgatory version of Alcatraz is as a prison guard who believes his purpose is to ensure the prisoners never escape, making him a perfect jailer for souls that aren't supposed to rest. The number 666 changes to 115 in Mob of the Dead. In Mob of the Dead, there is a hidden Easter egg involving the combination dial in the prison. If you enter the number 115, a reference to element 115, the supernatural element at the center of the zombie story, Brutus himself is heard whispering, "Not this time," or maybe next time. The dial then shifts to display 666 before returning to normal. This small, easily missed interaction contains significant lore. The 666 is a direct confirmation that the entity controlling the zombies on this map is the devil, or something functionally equivalent to it. Not Samantha, not Richtofen, but an ancient evil the Shadowman serves. The red-eyed zombies of Mob of the Dead are the only zombies in the Ether Saga whose eyes are not either orange-yellow, Samantha's era, or blue, Richtofen's era. Red eyes, a different master, a different cosmic jurisdiction. The pocket dimension of Alcatraz exists at the edge of the normal ether's authority, in a place where something older and crueler has control. Origins was set in World War I. The final map of the Black Ops 2 DLC cycle, Origins, made a dramatic leap backward in time and dimension. Set in France in 1918 during World War I, it introduced a version of Group 935 operating in a war zone dig site, excavating 115 deposits that had been present in that location since the Great War between humans and Apothecans, a prehistoric conflict that preceded recorded history. The four characters in Origins are the premise versions of the original crew: Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo, and Richtofen, meeting for the first time in a completely different dimension from the one the Ultimus story had been following. The Great War imagery is deliberate. In Dimension 63, the original Great War against the Apothecons was documented, meaning Group 935 was able to discover and begin excavating 115 much earlier than in the Ultimus timeline. 3 enormous steam-powered giant robots named Freya, Odin and Thor were built by Group 935 and powered by Divinium, the Primus Universe's name for element 115. These robots still exist within the lore of later maps, referenced and visible across multiple timelines. The 4 elemental staffs were ancient weapons. One of the most visually spectacular mechanics in Origins is the construction of the 4 elemental staffs: wind, ice, fire, and lightning. These are not Group 935 inventions. They are replicas. The original staffs were weapons created for and used by the 4 Primus heroes during the Great War. The ancient conflict fought thousands of years before the main events of the Zombies storyline. The version of Primus who fought in the Great War wielded the original staffs to defeat the Apothicons, and the version of Primus that the players control in Origins builds replicas using 115-powered technology to fight the Templar zombies awakened at the dig site. The act of building the staffs is, narratively, these 4 men unknowingly recreating the weapons their ancient selves wielded. In the zombies mythology, this is not coincidence. It is the cycle. It is the same story happening again in a slightly different arrangement, as it always has and always will, until eventually it doesn't. Primus Richtofen was already dead when he started. One of the most quietly devastating pieces of Primus lore is the understanding that Richtofen, in the Dimension 63 timeline, was forced to preserve Max's brain inside a drone after Max's was bitten by a zombie during the Origins outbreak, but the process was brutal. Removing a living human brain requires killing the body first. In the Origins map, Richtofen had already become intimate with death in a way that transformed him. He was also operating with full knowledge of the Chronorium, a book that contained the entire history of the multiverse, including his own role in it. He knew what he was supposed to do. He knew the cost. He carried that knowledge through every map of Black Ops 3 and into Black Ops 4, building toward a conclusion that required him to orchestrate the deaths of people he had come to genuinely care about. Primus Richtofen's tragedy is not ignorance. It is perfect, terrible knowledge. Doing the right thing while knowing exactly what doing the right thing will cost you. Shadows of Evil was a trap from the beginning. The Morgue City 4, Nero Blackstone the illusionist, Jessica Rose the femme fatale, Jack Vincent the corrupt detective, and Floyd Campbell the boxing champion were not chosen randomly by the Shadowman. Each of them had committed a significant moral transgression. Nero murdered his wife, Jessica arranged a rival's death, Vincent participated in corrupt killings as a detective, Floyd cheated in the ring in ways that had lethal consequences. The Shadowman found them specifically because their guilt made them susceptible to manipulation. He approached each of them separately, wearing disguises or posing as contacts, steering them toward Morgue City on the night he needed them. He told them he was offering redemption through a series of rituals. The rituals would actually open a gateway to free the Apothicons into their dimension. The moment the Shadow Man was trapped in the summoning key by the Keepers, the 4 characters summoned, Richtofen appeared and took the key. The next day, the Apothicons arrived and destroyed Dimension 63, killing every character in the map, including all 4 who had fought to save it. Redemption, technically. Survival, no. Jeff Goldblum did not know what he was voicing. In an interview conducted around the release of Black Ops 3, Jeff Goldblum, who voiced and motion captured Nero Blackstone, described his experience recording the character as delightfully surreal. he was given information about the noir setting, the character's magician background, and the general tone of existential horror. But the depth and complexity of the apothicon mythology surrounding the role was not extensively briefed to the actors. The voice cast for Shadows of Evil, Goldblum, Heather Graham, Neil McDonough, Ron Perlman, and Robert Picardo, were Hollywood talent brought in primarily for the quality of their performances in a horror context, not for their fluency in ether lore. The result is authentic performances of genuine confusion and terror from actors who weren't entirely sure what their characters were experiencing on a cosmological level, which, in a story about people being manipulated by ancient forces they don't understand, is arguably perfect casting logic. Dr. Monty was once best friends with the Shadow Man, the final antagonist of the ether story and its most prominent villain. Did not begin as enemies. Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man, before he was the Shadow Man, before either of them had the names they carry in the game, were friends. Both were keepers, the ancient race of beings who inhabited Agartha. Together, they discovered the existence of the dark ether, the dimension opposite to the paradise of Agartha. The Shadow Man became fascinated and then corrupted by what he found there. Monty went in after him, trying to save his friend, and became partially corrupted himself. The resulting war among the keepers, some choosing to remain pure, others falling to the dark ether, produced the apothicons on one side and the keepers we meet throughout the ether story on the other. The Shadow Man's entire plan throughout the saga is to return to Agartha. Monty's plan is to keep the multiverse stable so that Agartha survives. They were shaped by the same event. They want fundamentally incompatible things, and they once stood on the same side of a line neither of them saw coming. The Shadow Man was Malcolm McDowell's voice. Dr. Monty is voiced by Malcolm McDowell, an actor whose previous roles include Alex in A Clockwork Orange, a performance so iconic and so associated with casual, articulate menace that casting him as the final antagonist of the ether story seems almost too perfect. McDowell's warm, British, grandfatherly delivery for Monty is a deliberate tonal choice that makes the eventual villain reveal land harder. Every piece of gentle encouragement, every reassuring speech about saving the multiverse, every friendly aside delivered in that comfortable voice, is recalibrated in retrospect once players understand that Monty has been engineering the eternal cycle primarily to preserve his own existence. The voice makes the character. Monty's warmth is the point. A monster who sounds like a kindly old man who wants the best for you is infinitely more disturbing than one who announces its malevolence. The Chronorium knows everything. The Chronorium is an artifact that appears in the later Primus storyline, a book that contains a complete chronicle of the entire history and future of all of reality. Every event in every timeline, including every version of Richthofen's journey, is written in it. Richthofen first discovers it at a facility called Zero Base, an alternate dimension research station built by a version of Maxis in an uninhabited world. The book can only be read by someone with a soul, a detail that has significant implications for the soulless version of Maxis and the Primus crew's interactions with it. Reading the Chronorium gives Richthofen absolute knowledge of what is supposed to happen and what he is supposed to do. It is, in the broadest sense, the universe's operating manual. And crucially, the pages change. As the Alcatraz events unfold and the cycle begins to fracture, Richthofen notices that the text has shifted. Events that were supposed to happen are no longer written there. The book's changes are the first indication that the cycle can actually be broken. Nikolai was always the one who had to end it. In the final chapter of the Ether story, Tag der Toten, the last Black Ops 4 Zombies map, the task of breaking the cycle falls to Nikolai Belinsky, the vodka-soaked, grief-stricken, darkly comedic Soviet soldier who entered this story as a brainwashed test subject. Is the character who must poison the rest of the crew, hold the summoning key, and destroy the multiverse so that something new can begin. Richthofen understood this. In his final scene before the events of Tag der Toten, he hands Nikolai the chronorium and says quietly that he doesn't have the strength to do what must be done, implicitly acknowledging that Nikolai does. The character arc of Nikolai from disposable drunk soldier to the one man whose hands ultimately destroy and rebuild the universe is one of the most unexpected and emotionally effective character journeys in gaming lore, told almost entirely through Easter egg cutscenes, radio logs, and dialogue that most players never hear. The Dark Ether saga began with a clean slate. When the Ether story ended with Nikolai's sacrifice in Tag der Toten, destroying the multiverse, sending everything into the dark ether, leaving only Eddie and Samantha to walk into a new universe. The stage was set for what Treyarch called the Dark Ether saga. This new story, beginning with Black Ops Cold War's Die Machine map, takes place in a single specific timeline. No infinite multiverse, no cycling paradoxes. A world historically grounded in 1983 Cold War geopolitics, where CIA operatives discovered element 115 residue and opened a dimensional breach into the dark ether, a version of that realm that is now inhabited not by corrupted keepers and apothecons, but by entirely new entities. Eldritch elder gods who filled a power vacuum after the Ether story's multiverse was destroyed. The Dark Ether saga is, in its own way, a story about consequences. What fills the space left by something that was destroyed? What grows in a wound after it closes? The answer is something different. Not better, just different. Die Machine built. On Nacht der Untotens Ruins. The first map of the Dark Ether, Saga Die Machine, is set at a facility built around and partially incorporating the ruins of the original Nacht der Untoten bunker. A Cold War era research team discovered the abandoned World War II location, recognized the element 115 residue, and built a new facility around it, complete with a cyclotron used to attempt to open a dimensional breach into the dark ether. When CIA-backed unit Requiem arrived to shut down the breach, they were walking through the halls of both timelines simultaneously, the bones of the original outbreak location beneath the infrastructure of Cold War era, dimensional research. The original bunker ruins are present in Die Machine as a playable area with graffiti-covered walls and additional entrances not present in the original Nacht layout. The developers intentionally made the old geometry visible within the new one, creating a physical palimpsest. The history of one story written over the bones of another. Requiem's director was never who. It seemed, throughout Black Ops Cold War Zombies, the CIA-backed Requiem strike team, led by Field Agent Gregory Weaver, with members including Samantha Maxis, Dr. Elizabeth Gray, Dr. Oscar Strauss, and others, reports to a mysterious figure known only as the Director. This figure provides mission parameters, resources, and occasionally unsettling instructions that seem to go beyond a standard intelligence mandate. At the conclusion of the Cold War Zombies arc, after Samantha sacrifices herself to seal the dark ether from the inside and the team achieves what should be their final victory, the director orders the arrest of the entire Requiem senior staff, Then the identity is revealed. The director is Edward Richtofen. Not a Primus version, not an Ultimus version. A version of Richtofen from the new universe created after the Ether story's conclusion. One who has been this entire time, orchestrating the Requiem team's operations for reasons he has not chosen to share. The old manipulator, still manipulating, just on a different board. Samantha lost her memory in the new universe. When Samantha Maxis and Eddie, the child version of Richtofen purified by Dr. Monty, walked into the new universe at the end of the Ether story, they brought nothing with them. No memories of the cycle, no recollection of the MPD, or Griffin Station, or the house in Agartha, or any of the events that defined the previous reality. Samantha woke up in a new timeline with no knowledge of who she had been. By the time Black Ops Cold War begins, she has grown up in an orphanage, become a field agent for Requiem, and is operating as a capable intelligence operative with no idea that she once controlled every zombie on Earth from inside a moon-based ether pyramid. When she discovers the dark ether and begins to develop abilities related to it, those abilities are a residual echo of a power she no longer remembers having. Her arc in the Dark Ether saga is a version of rediscovering herself without any of the context that would make that self legible to her. The Forsaken was the final boss of the Cold War arc. After 2 years of Cold War era zombies maps, Die Machine, Firebase Z, Mauer der Toten, Forsaken, and the Outbreak events, Requiem's mission culminated in an encounter with the Forsaken, a massive dark ether entity of enormous power. Unlike the Apothecons of the Ether story, who were corrupted keepers from within the Ether's own hierarchy, the Forsaken is native to the Dark Ether, one of the elder gods who filled the vacuum after the previous universe was destroyed. Trapping the Forsaken required Samantha Maxis to enter the Dark Ether herself, becoming the seal from the inside. She had no choice, and she made the decision with full awareness of what it meant. Vanishing into a dimension of cosmic horror so that it couldn't escape into the world. She was gone for years. The Dark Ether saga's emotional core is Samantha Maxis, choosing, again, to sacrifice herself, echoing the structural role she has played across multiple stories without remembering any of them. Firebase Z connected Vietnam and the Cold War. Firebase Z, the second major Cold War zombies map, is set at a secret CIA research station in Vietnam in 1984. The story of this map involves Requiem discovering that Omega Group, the Soviet counterpart to Requiem, has been conducting dark ether experiments at this location and has managed to pull Samantha Maxis into the dark ether in the process. The map's setting is rich with political implication. A covert CIA station in Vietnam, years after the war, operating a secret dimensional research program while ostensibly conducting Cold War intelligence work. The geography isn't incidental. Firebase Z is built on a location with naturally high dark ether resonance, ground already saturated with death and conflict that makes the dimensional membrane thinner. The Zombies saga has always been interested in using real historical sites as locations where the ether bleeds through, and Firebase Z is the most explicit version of that theme. The dead zone of a real war literally becoming a gateway to something worse. Omega Group was the Soviet mirror image. Requiem's CIA-backed operations throughout the Cold War zombies arc are consistently complicated by the presence of Omega Group, the Soviet equivalent, where Requiem wants to study, contain, and ultimately seal the dark ether breaches. Omega Group wants to weaponize them. Colonel Valentina Kuzmin leads Omega Group's operations with the specific intent of giving the Soviet Union a strategic, supernatural advantage in the Cold War. The two organizations mirror each other almost perfectly in structure. Each has scientists, field operatives, a mysterious director figure, and access to the same basic information about the dark ether. The difference is philosophy. Requiem believes these entities should be contained. Omega Group believes they should be controlled. The entire Cold War arc is, at its macro-political level, a parable about the same fundamental conflict that defined the actual Cold War. Two ideological systems encountering the same unknown and responding to it in mirror image ways, each convinced their approach is the correct one. Agent Ravenov was a double agent. Throughout the Cold War, Zombies maps, one of the most important recurring figures is Grigory Ravenov, a Soviet Omega Group operative who secretly provides intelligence to Requiem. He appears in Firebase Z as a complicated internal informant, someone who genuinely believes in his country, but has become deeply disturbed by Omega Group's willingness to put civilian populations at risk in pursuit of dark ether weaponization. Ravenov isn't a defector. He doesn't want to betray the Soviet Union. He wants to stop the specific people within it who are, in his assessment, going to destroy the world. His willingness to feed information to the enemy he's supposed to be fighting against, purely on the basis of a moral line he won't cross, is one of the Dark Ether Saga's most compelling character threads. He represents the quiet resistance inside institutions. The person who stays in the room and whispers the truth out rather than leaving and shouting it. Every hidden song in Zombies was a lore document. The musical Easter eggs, Elena Siegmund's vocals, Kevin Sherwood's compositions, the haunting tracks hidden in every map from World at War onward, were never just atmosphere. Every hidden song contains lyrics that correspond directly to the lore state of whichever character they're associated with. Lullaby for a Dead Man in Verrückt is Samantha's grief. The one in Shinonuma is Samantha's desire for revenge against Richthofen. Beauty of Annihilation in Der Riese is the moment of betrayal at the facility. 115 in Kino der Toten is a fever dream from within the ether itself, describing the element's nature through fractured imagery. Coming Home in Moon is about Richthofen's finally completing his scheme and discovering it feels hollow. Drowning, featured in Black Ops 2 maps, is from the perspective of Maxis making his terrible calculations. Elena Siegmund has said in interviews that she was given story documents and character backgrounds before writing. She knew exactly who she was voicing. The music is not decoration, it is narrative scored. The ray gun was Group 935's first successful wonder weapon. The ray gun, the most iconic weapon in all of Zombies, the one every player prays to find in the mystery box, was invented by Dr. H. Porter of Group 935, a scientist whose full name appears in upgrade designation strings on the pack-a-punched version. Porter's X-2 ray gun. Porter was one of the researchers at Group 935 who managed to successfully harness element 115 in a direct-fire weapon capable of disintegrating organic matter. The weapon's characteristic green energy discharge is a visual representation of element 115 in an energetically excited state. Porter was apparently an American operative, one of several non-German scientists who had joined Group 935 internationally, consistent with the organization's founding charter as a multinational research group before the Nazi funding complicated its idealistic origins. The ray gun Mark II, introduced much later in Black Ops 2 and 3, was also invented by Porter. Two separate designs for channeling 115 energy into handheld weapons, representing the apex of Group 935's weapons research. The Wunderwaffe was never mass-produced. Richthofen designed the Wunderwaffe DG-2, the electric arc wonder weapon first found in Shi-no-Numa, and Maxis promised the Reichstag that it would be mass-produced for use by German forces in the war. It wasn't. Despite the weapon's obviously transformative military potential, only a handful of prototypes were ever completed, and Maxis never delivered on his promise to the German High Command. The reasons were partly technical. The weapon required substantial amounts of element 115 to function, and the supply of 115 was finite and carefully controlled, and partly the result of Richthofen's deliberate non-cooperation. He had designed it for research purposes, not for distribution. In the in-game fiction, this failure to deliver the Wunderwaffe in quantity is one of the key factors that strained Group 935's relationship with its Nazi funders. The technology that could have changed the outcome of World War II was deliberately held back by its creator in a facility full of zombies because two scientists couldn't stop fighting each other long enough to manufacture the promised weapons. Mauer der Toten was Cold War Berlin. The Cold War Zombies map, Mauer der Toten, Wall of the Dead, is set in a devastated version of Cold War East Berlin, torn apart not by politics this time, but by a dark ether outbreak that has left entire city blocks overrun with the undead. The map is set in 1984, in the shadow of the Berlin Wall, and it uses the setting to draw a direct parallel between the physical partition of the Cold War city and the dimensional partition that the Zombies story is about, a wall between worlds and the horrors that appear when the wall cracks. The characters navigating the zombie-infested East Berlin streets include a young Klaus, a robotic soldier created as part of Requiem's experimental augmentation program. The map's visual language, crumbling socialist architecture, propaganda posters still on walls, watchtowers, checkpoint signage, is meticulously detailed, making it one of the more visually grounded and historically evocative maps in the entire saga. Black Ops 6 revealed Richthofen's motivation. When the Requiem strike team was arrested at the end of the Cold War arc, the reveal that Richthofen was the director behind it all raised an obvious question. Why? What was this version of Richthofen doing? And why did he need the Requiem team to spend years fighting dark ether outbreaks? Black Ops 6 began to answer this. This new universe's Richthofen had a wife and a son. Both of them died, and the lore strongly implies they were killed by Samantha Maxis and Gregory Weaver, acting under CIA orders to eliminate Richthofen before he could become a threat, a mission that apparently preceded the Cold War events. Richthofen's orchestration of Requiem, his seemingly altruistic management of the zombie crisis, was in part driven by a deeply personal grief and a desire for revenge against the people who took his family. The new universe's Richthofen isn't just a manipulator repeating old patterns. He is a grieving man whose grief has made him extremely dangerous, in a very familiar way. Terminus Island was a prison and a laboratory. Black Ops 6's launch map, Terminus, takes place on a remote Pacific Ocean prison island, where the arrested Requiem team has been held captive for years following the end of the Cold War arc. Dr. William Peck, who survived the Forsaken map's explosion, has located them and is organizing their escape. The island isn't just a prison. It's also an active research site where Requiem's own former scientists are being used to continue the dark ether research they were originally imprisoned for refusing to pursue on Richthofen's terms. The map uses the island prison setting to create a claustrophobic, morally complicated environment. The people trying to escape are both the heroes of the story and the researchers whose work, however involuntary, may be causing ongoing harm. It is a map about the ethics of survival and complicity, wrapped in the same frantic zombie shooting formula that's always been the mode's delivery vehicle for philosophy. The souls of the original crew were purified into children. One of the most quietly affecting sequences in the Ether saga occurs in the Black Ops 3 maps, when Primus is collecting the souls of the Ultimus crew members, the brainwashed, tortured, memories-wiped versions of Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, to place inside the summoning key. Dr. Monty receives these souls at the house in Agartha. When a soul arrives, Monty transforms it into its youngest, most innocent form. The soldiers become children. The trauma, the memory wipes, the years of being used as tools by Richthofen. All of it is washed away, leaving only the essential person underneath, made small again. They join Samantha and Eddie in the house, where they play with toys in the warm light of Agartha, while the grown versions of themselves fight through hellscapes to make that safety possible. The fact that the house is later revealed to be part of Monty's manipulative cycle doesn't entirely erase the genuine tenderness of the image, which is perhaps the most disturbing thing about it. The Great War was fought in the Ice Age. The Great War, the ancient conflict between humanity, the Keepers, and the Apothicons, is depicted in lore fragments as having taken place approximately in 1300 AD, though some timeline interpretations suggest it precedes recorded history entirely. What is consistent across all references is that the 4 warriors who became Primus fought in it using the original elemental staffs, real versions of the replicas built in Origins. The conflict lasted 7 years. The Apothicons attempted to break from the Dark Ether and invade creation directly, seeking to consume Agartha. The Keepers allied with humanity and fought them back. The Primus crew's role in defeating the Apothicons was so significant that Pablo Marinus, a knight whose life was saved at the battle's beginning, recorded everything he witnessed. His account is what eventually allowed the Dimension 63 version of Group 935 to find and excavate Element 115 during World War I, setting the entire alternate Primus timeline in motion. The Great War created its own aftermath across thousands of years. The staff's names were elemental descriptions. The 4 elemental staffs built in Origins and associated with specific Primus characters carry names that are deeply embedded in the broader elemental mythology of the Ether saga. The Staff of Wind is associated with Dempsey, fitting for a character whose aggression and mobility define him. The Staff of Ice is Nikolai's, a weapon that numbs and freezes, associated with a man who numbed himself with alcohol against grief. The Staff of Fire is Takeo's, fire as honor, as cleansing, as destruction that preserves form after the fact. The Staff of Lightning is Richthofen's, electricity and unpredictability, control and chaos in the same discharge. The associations are not random. The original Primus who wielded the staffs in the Great War were matched to them by temperament as much as by necessity. That these same 4 men, thousands of years later, find themselves building replicas of the same weapons they once carried is the Ether Saga's clearest statement about the nature of identity within an eternal cycle. The Gobblegum Factory was Dr. Monty's, in Revelations, the final map of Black Ops 3's Zombies storyline. Players can see Dr. Monty's factory, the facility where gobblegums are manufactured, where the mystery box is stocked, where the perk-a-cola machines are assembled and packaged. It is an enormous, dreamlike industrial space that exists outside normal dimensional boundaries. Monty is heard singing the Juggernog jingle in one section of the factory, confirming he composed, or at least adopted, the perk machine jingles. The factory is a physical representation of the entire support structure of the Zombies game mode. Every power-up, every perk, every random box item. Existing as a literal place with a literal owner who deliberately manufactured those items and seeded them across dimensions. Playing Zombies maps and grabbing perks means using products from Monty's assembly line. Every sip of Juggernog, every double tap purchase, every mystery box roll. Transactions in a store whose owner is one of the story's most dangerous beings. The original crew had their memories stolen. 3 times, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo were subjected to Richthofen's experimental memory wiping procedures in the Siberian facility before the events of World at War. But this wasn't the only time their memories were taken. In the Primus timeline, following the Origins events, the same characters were placed in a sleep state by Dr. Monty and kept in cold storage while the Primus story played out around them. Awakening only when needed, with carefully managed awareness of their circumstances. Then, in the conclusion of the saga, Nikolai poisons them all, ending their lives so that their souls can be released from the summoning key and the cycle can collapse. The original crew's story is, stripped of its science fiction scaffolding, about people who were used as instruments whose identities were repeatedly taken from them and who ultimately became the sacrifice required to end the system that made all of it possible. 3 times their memories went. The last time, their lives followed. The real Alcatraz escape inspired Mob of the Dead, the specific escape mechanism at the center of Mob of the Dead, 4 inmates building a makeshift aircraft on the prison roof to fly to the Golden Gate Bridge, is inspired by the actual mythology surrounding the 1962 Alcatraz escape, in which 3 inmates disappeared from their cells using improvised tools and a raft constructed from raincoats. Their fate was never determined. The Zombies lore map notes found across Mob of the Dead reference this event, and the audio logs narrated by the fictional guard Stanley Ferguson draw deliberately on the kind of retrospective documentation produced after the real escape. The in-fiction escape of Arlington and his crew was planned for New Year's Eve, 1933, nearly 3 decades before the real 1962 attempt. The connection is atmosphere and homage rather than direct adaptation, but Treyarch's choice to set the map on Alcatraz was never purely aesthetic. The real prison's mythology, impossible escapes, institutional cruelty, the gap between official narrative and what actually happened, suited a story about people trapped between worlds, unable to leave, dying in loops. Elena Siegmund's voice is embedded in the ether. Eleanor Siegmund, the vocalist responsible for the most iconic Zombies musical tracks, 115, Abracadabra, Archangel, Nightmare Coming Home, has described her creative process as one of genuine immersion in the mythology. She was given extensive character documentation and lore notes before recording, allowing her to approach each song as a specific character's interior monologue or perspective, rather than a generic horror aesthetic. The result is that every Sigmund track in the Zombies canon is technically a primary text, a character expressing something the in-game dialogue doesn't fully articulate. When players describe having emotional responses to specific maps that they struggle to explain rationally, they are often responding to the layered information embedded in the music. registering the character's emotional state at a level below conscious attention. Siegmund's contributions to zombies are not supplemental to the lore. They are, in some ways, the most direct pipeline into the emotional reality of the characters that the story has. The bus driver was never human. The mysterious bus driver in transit, the hulking uniformed figure who silently pilots the bus through the fog-choked Green Run landscape, is not a zombie. He is not a person. He is something considerably stranger. In the lore, the bus driver is a denizen that has been fused with the bus system through prolonged ether exposure, an autonomous construct that has bonded with its mechanical function to the point where the function is the entity. He follows his route. He opens his doors. He sounds his horn. He has no hostile agenda. He simply drives. If you attempt to board without following his rhythm, you get left behind. If you understand his patterns, you travel safely. He is, in his strange way, one of the few reliable things in a world that has been completely unmade by the ether. In the broader fiction, the denizens, those small, leaping creatures that attack your lantern in the fog, are also ether constructs, and the bus driver represents what happens when a denizen finds purpose in a machine and refuses to leave. He is a ghost made of schedule and duty, driving a route through a dead world with no passengers and no destination. The Victis crew were all broken before the story started. The four characters of the Victis crew, Misty, Marlton, Russman, and Samuel Stuhlinger, are the protagonists of the Black Ops 2 zombie maps, and unlike the original crew, they were not chosen, enhanced, or experimented on in any deliberate way. They are survivors of the collapse. Their backstories are bleak in quite ordinary ways. Samuel Stuhlinger hears Richthofen's voice in his head because he once ate the flesh of a zombie to survive. An act of starvation-driven desperation that left a psychic residue in his mind that Richthofen uses to communicate instructions across dimensions. Russman suffers from dissociative fugue states, periods of total memory loss that erased most of his life, and was working at the Broken Arrow facility before the outbreak fragmented whatever was left of his identity. Marlton Johnson is a survivalist prepper who genuinely believes he is the most intelligent person in any room he enters, and the terror is that he is often right. Misty holds the group together through sheer anger, a refusal to quit that she channels into everything, including how she handles people she doesn't like. They didn't get a briefing or a purpose. They just survived, and survival kept pointing them in the same direction. The die-rise skyscrapers were already dying, the Black Ops. 2 Map Die-Rise is set in post-apocalyptic Shanghai, a city of collapsing skyscrapers, buckled floors, and elevator shafts that have become vertical highways through destruction. The specific setting detail that most players miss is that the buildings were not destroyed by the zombie outbreak. They were already partially collapsed before the undead arrived. The rockets launched from the moon at the end of the previous arc didn't just send a vague pulse of ether energy across the Earth. They caused earthquakes, structural failures, and cascading infrastructure collapses in major cities worldwide. Die-Rise's Shanghai exists in the aftermath of a literal planetary catastrophe. The buildings are dying because the Earth was hit. The zombie outbreak is almost a secondary concern. What Victis is navigating is the ruins of civilization, destroyed by the Maxis Richthofen conflict, in a city that had nothing to do with Group 935 or Element 115, and simply happened to be on the planet when the missiles landed. Buried is set beneath a ghost town. The map Buried is a 2-level environment. You begin above ground in a decaying processing plant. then descend into the earth to find an entire underground town, somehow preserved beneath the surface. This town is a late 19th century Western settlement that, by the in-game lore timeline, was buried underground sometime in the 1800s, not by a geological event, but by deliberate concealment, possibly connected to early element 115 experimentation on American soil. The portraits of Michael Faraday inside the mansion on the map are not random art choices. Faraday was a real 19th century scientist whose pioneering work with electromagnetism has direct theoretical relevance to some of the foundational physics underlying element 115 experiments. Someone who lived in or studied this town found Faraday's work significant enough to honor it on their walls. The giant friendly NPC called Arthur, who helps players by moving obstacles and swatting zombies, sometimes called Leroy by the community, is implied to be a figure from the town's buried history, preserved in some form by the ambient ether energy that has been saturating the ground above him for generations. The Forsaken was a man before the dark ether. In the Black Ops Cold War storyline, the primary supernatural antagonist is the Forsaken, an enormous, world-consuming entity of dark ether energy who serves as the final boss of the Cold War Zombies arc. The Forsaken is terrifying in scope and nearly incomprehensible in scale, able to reshape environments and consume entire facilities. What the lore reveals through collected intel pieces is that the Forsaken was once a man. His name was Kazimir Zhikov. He was a Soviet scientist dispatched to the Project N station site in Poland after World War II to seal the particle accelerator rift that had opened during the Nazi experiments. He was ordered to shut it down and contain the damage. When Zhikov arrived at the facility, something went wrong. The rift pulled him in. He spent the next 40 years trapped in the dark ether, where time passes differently. For Zhikov, that subjective experience lasted not 40 years, but something closer to centuries. Whatever came back out of the dark ether when Omega Group finally pulled him free was no longer Kazimir Zhikov in any meaningful sense. It was what the dark ether had made of him, across a subjective eternity of suffering. The Forsaken isn't just a monster. He is what a human being becomes after spending a lifespan in hell. Project N Station created the new universe, the facility that serves as the setting for D-Machine. Project N Station, a Nazi-era particle accelerator in occupied Poland, is the singular point of origin for the entire Dark Ether saga. It was built on March 7, 1944, when Dr. Vogel and his team ran the 12th test of their cyclotron. The accelerator malfunctioned. A rift opened to the dark ether. The soldiers nearby were infected and turned. An entirely new exotic element, Ethereum, was isolated from the infected fallen. The cyclotron, once activated by the breach, began running on its own power indefinitely. It could not be switched off. The rift was closed physically, but never actually sealed. The dimensional membrane had been punctured at that specific location in reality, permanently thinning the barrier between the human world and the dark ether. Every zombie outbreak in the new universe ultimately traces its roots to this single test in a basement in Poland in 1944. One experiment, one power failure, one rift. Everything that follows, Omega Group, Requiem, Ethereum, the Cold War arms race, the Forsaken, is downstream consequence of a particle accelerator that ran 12 tests and broke the world on the last one. Ethereum changed how the new universe works. The new universe created at the end of the Ether Saga does not contain element 115. the old multiverse's central building material, the stuff of space-time, the ore in the meteors, the power source for every wonder weapon in the original story, simply doesn't exist in the dark ether world. Instead, it has Ethereum, the exotic element isolated by Dr. Vogel after the Project Endstation breach. Ethereum is described as more powerful than 115, but also less stable, with strong catalytic effects on nuclear and plutonium-based reactions. It is the ether's equivalent of the old universe's 115, but wilder and harder to control. Omega Group's entire strategic ambition in the Cold War arc is the weaponization of Ethereum, the belief that controlling this substance would give the Soviet Union an overwhelming military and scientific advantage. Requiem's goal is to contain it and prevent that advantage from materializing. The Cold, or the players navigate, isn't fought with missiles and politics. It's fought over a crystallized substance from another dimension that both sides understand imperfectly and want desperately. The mystery box was designed by Richtofen. Among the many items seeded throughout Zombies maps in the Ether timeline, the mystery box stands as one of the most iconic. A glowing, floating item chest that could contain practically any weapon in the game, including the rarest wonder weapons, before teleporting away with the sound of a child's music box tune. The specific design of the mystery box was Richtofen's. He created it as part of the broader system of tools he seeded across dimensions and timelines to give his various test subjects access to weapons, ensuring that the 4 characters he needed alive would have the resources to survive long enough to serve his purposes. The teddy bear that appears when the box teleports away, signaling that the box is moving to a new location, is not decorative. It is a signature. Richtofen designed it deliberately. The bear was Samantha's, taken from her during their conflict as another small cruelty. Every time you see that bear sit in the box and float away, it is a reminder that the entire mystery box system was built by the man who locked Samantha away and used her grief as fuel for his schemes. Broken Arrow was America's group, 935. In the background lore of Black Ops 2 and 3, the United States' response to learning about Group 935's research was to create their own version of the same program. The American secret research organization was called Broken Arrow, and it operated outside standard military channels for decades, running zombie-related experiments, developing American wonder weapons, and studying Element 115 using material gathered from the same meteorite impacts that Group 935 had exploited. Russman, one of the Vitis crew members, was a Broken Arrow operative before the outbreak fragmented his memory. The map der Eisendrache contains lore references to Broken Arrow operations in the United States, including research stations in Nevada that would later appear in other map setups. The Americans knew almost everything Group 935 was doing. They had their own captured German scientists, their own 115 deposits, their own attempts to replicate the technology. The zombie apocalypse in the Ether timeline was not a surprise to everyone. Multiple governments, multiple programs, and multiple scientists understood what was coming and made the calculation that the advantages outweighed the risks. They were wrong. The Shadow Man was in the summoning key the whole time. After the events of Shadows of Evil, when Primus defeats the Shadow Man, and he is captured inside the summoning key, players might reasonably assume the threat is resolved. It is not. The Shadow Man exists within the key throughout the entirety of the Black Ops 3 story, waiting. When Primus returns to the house in Agartha and gives the key to Maxis, who has spent this time in the house, reconnecting with Samantha, building toward his own plan. Maxis becomes curious about the artifact. His curiosity leads to him being manipulated by the Shadow Man's presence inside the key, and he inadvertently releases the imprisoned entity. The Shadow Man escapes, frees the apothecons from the dark ether, and merges multiple dimensions into a single chaotic space, triggering the revelation sequence. The summoning key's entire design as an artifact is, from the apothecon perspective, a Trojan horse, something the heroes would inevitably bring into Agartha themselves, delivering the enemy directly to the one place the enemy most wanted to be. The cycle's true keeper was Primus all along. One of the most profound reversals in the Ether Saga's conclusion involves the nature of the Great War itself. Throughout Black Ops 3 and 4, it is established that Primus's role in defeating the apothecons during the Great War is what created the conditions for the entire subsequent history of the Ether story. But the twist is that Primus in the Great War is the same Primus who came back through the cycle. The same four men, in ancient times, fighting the apothecons with staffs, guided by knowledge they had accumulated across countless iterations of the loop. The Great War was won because Primus already knew how to win it. They knew how to win it because they had fought it before, and they had fought it before because they won it the first time. There is no first time. The Primus who fought the original Great War were already the product of cycles they couldn't remember. The heroism that saved the world was built on a foundation of manufactured repetition, and the only way to make heroism real in the end was to destroy the foundation entirely.